Let's start. So, yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, which is on sponsor license compliance and teaching you the key things that you need to be aware of. I think I recognize many of the names of the people who are logged on today. So you probably know a bit about us already, but I'll just briefly tell you a little about Truth Legal and myself before we dive in. I just say, yeah, there aren't huge numbers of us, so I'm happy if you have any questions just to sort of jump in and ask as we go along. So it's that kind of cliche that there's no stupid questions. So yeah, if anything's not clear, just come off. I think it's good if you can go on mute just unless you are intending to speak. That'd be good. But yeah, if you want to ask a question, you can come off mute. Hello, good morning, Sarah. Yeah, so if you're, ask a question, come off mute. Otherwise, if you could be on mute, that would be great. Or you can always drop a question in the chat box as well. Okay, so for those of you less familiar, Truth Legal, we are a law firm based in Leeds and Harrogate. I'm currently in my room in Headingley, famous for the cricket ground. So yeah, we're a law firm specializing in various areas: immigration, employment, personal injury, family law, professional negligence, and a few other litigation areas. My area is purely immigration, so that's been my sole focus since 2008. So yeah, that's my real area that I've been practicing for the last 14 years. I've been a part-time lecturer in immigration law, so this is very much my area. We've increasingly been doing more work around sponsor licenses, supporting businesses with their sponsor license. Sorry, Katie's actually helping with the slides. If you could just move on, Katie, thanks. Yeah, so we've been increasingly supporting businesses, particularly post-Brexit. As many of you know, we, since the end of free movement and Brexit, any EU national has to be sponsored. So there's been this real kind of increase, I'd say almost like an explosion of businesses looking to get sponsor license. So in terms of what we'll look at today, I mean, I guess you'll be aware to some extent about the importance of sponsor license compliance. You'll have heard, oh, this is an important thing. It sounds mildly threatening at times. Best to try and sort of get a handle on what it's all about. Well, it is a strange concept, sponsor license compliance. And strictly speaking, if you want to fully understand it, there are, I would say, at least 4 90-page Home Office guidance documents that you need to go through if you want to genuinely kind of get your head around it all. But what I'm going to try and do today is just to condense it into a sort of key things that you need to be aware of. We'll be looking at the sort of basics of why sponsor license compliance is so important, and really why the Home Office think that sponsor license compliance is so important. We'll then have a look at what I've called Home Office profiling. So, I mean, I gather most of you are involved in running a business of some sort. We'll have a look at what sort of businesses tend to be on the radar of the Home Office. Okay, so it's not an exact science knowing, I mean, basically how likely are you to be targeted. We'll have a look at what the sanctions are if you don't comply with your sponsor license duties. So there's a bit of the scare factor there, but you need to be aware of why it's important to stay on the right side of the Home Office. We'll then have a look at the different types of compliance check that the Home Office can carry out in you. And then the final section, I guess, is really getting to the sort of the key issue here as well. How can you, what do you need to be aware of in terms of adapting your systems so that you are complying with all these Home Office requirements? Next slide, please. Okay, so who's this webinar for? Some of you are maybe considering applying for a license. So I think this is really useful for you, so you know that you know what you're getting yourself into before you go down the sponsor license route. So your ultimate concern is to get people in, get good employees, good workers in from outside the UK, get them working, get these excellent people in. They're often highly skilled, highly competent, but you also need to know about the sponsor license compliance stuff. So it's not just about shelling out the cash to pay for your license and to potentially pay for legal assistance if you wish. It's also about understanding the kind of administrative responsibilities that come along with it. You might alternatively be an organization that already has a license. You may or may not have had any kind of inspection. You might have got away without one so far, but you might be thinking, well, sponsorship is becoming increasingly important for our business model. We're maybe increasingly sponsoring more numbers. I'll talk about this in a bit, but general principle is the higher the numbers you sponsor, the more likely you come on the radar. So it could be this webinar hopefully will help organizations who already have a license. The main focus today is on the skilled worker sponsor license. Most of what I say has applicability for more obscure types of sponsor license, but I think the one, I presume that the main one that people are looking here is for a skilled worker license, but most of what I say also applies for other types of license, including the religious worker license. Next, please, Katie. Okay, so before I get into the detail, it's important to understand why the Home Office makes such a big thing about sponsor license compliance. And so this is actually taken from one of the key Home Office guidance documents, which talks about their guiding principles around sponsorship. And it's worth just understanding these key principles, because then everything else sort of makes a bit more sense. So I'm just going to read out some of the key passages that I've highlighted here. So this is, according to the Home Office, sponsorship is based on two main principles. Sponsorship is a privilege, not a right. Okay. This means that those who benefit most directly from employing migrant workers must play their part in ensuring the immigration system is not abused. Okay, I've just highlighted that as the key part there. And what they're really saying is, yes, you can sponsor, but you've got to play your part contributing towards an effective immigration system. Later on, it goes on to say, when a sponsor is granted a license, significant trust is placed in them. With this trust comes a direct responsibility to act in accordance with the UK's immigration laws, all parts of the sponsor guidance, and with the wider UK law. So the Home Office do really expect you to be reading all this detailed guidance. Now, in reality, I think very few business owners, HR people, whoever, directors have the time to go through all this guidance, but they do expect you to be on top of the guidance, and hopefully I can get you to a close enough position that you can be complying. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then this is also taken from the sponsor license guidance. They talk about the objectives of compliance. Again, this is looking at the sort of high level stuff before I get down to the nitty gritty. What the guidance says is to achieve these aims, all licensed sponsors must fulfill certain duties. These duties include, but are not limited to, preventing abuse of immigration laws and sponsorship arrangements, capturing early patterns of behavior that may cause concern, addressing possible weaknesses in processes, and monitoring compliance with the immigration rules. We'll have a bit more of a look at what this means in practice, but the way I will often describe sponsor license compliance with my clients is that the way to look at it is you're basically an extension of the Home Office, okay? So you are, to put it bluntly, kind of responsible for keeping tabs on the migrants that you're sponsoring, okay? So the basic principle is the Home Office will let you have a license if they think that you're capable of doing things properly. They will place this trust on you that you're kind of keeping tabs on the individual so they don't have to. If they think that you're not doing stuff right, if they think you don't have proper systems in place to monitor the individuals, then that's when it can all go wrong. Okay, next, we will look at sanctions. Okay, so this is, I guess, some of the sort of scary stuff, you could say. There are sanctions for not complying with your sponsor license duties, and it's important that you understand what they are. There are different sanctions depending on what stage of the process you're at. So first of all, I'm just looking at the sanctions at the application stage. So this is how your organization or your business can be effectively sort of punished if you are not deemed to be complying with your sponsor license duties. So if you apply for an application, but the Home Office somehow deem you not complying with your sponsor license duties, they will likely refuse your application. Okay, there's two types of negative decision: a refusal and a rejection. A rejection is kind of when you've just not filled in the right bit of form, you've not given them a bit of information they need. Rejection is not so bad because you can apply again straight away. If your application is refused, you have automatically something called a cooling off period. Quite patronizing, but there's basically a 6-month minimum ban on reapplying if your application gets refused. Obviously, there's the loss of money, business disruption. What I'm not talking about so much in this webinar is the kind of general process of applying for a license and stuff. But currently, it's taken 8 weeks to get a license. So there's obviously a problem if you get refused. You've got the time and money incurred, wasted in getting a refused application, loss of time. And then this problem that if you get a refusal against your name, you're sort of on the radar of the Home Office. So to kind of put it bluntly, you've got a bit of a black mark against your name. So that even if you then reapply, yes, you have to get everything right this time, but you're kind of held to a higher standard. Okay. Next, please. Okay, and then there's the sanctions if you already have a license in place. Actually, the sanctions are kind of a bit more scary if you already have a license in place. A lot of license holders may have got a license on their own without. So I always say that for anyone looking to get a license, you can do it yourself, or you can get a lawyer. If you're doing it yourself, you need a lot of time to devote to the guidance and preparing it all. Many license holders get a license, but basically don't really understand what they're doing. That can be problematic because then you can face these sanctions as a license holder. There are various types of sanctions. You can have your license suspended. You can have it downgraded from A-rated to B-rated, which places limitations on what you can do with your sponsor license. Or at the extreme end, but not uncommon, is you can have your license revoked. If your license is revoked, then unfortunately this means that any sponsored worker has their employment immediately terminated, so they can no longer work for you, which is clearly massively disruptive. I guess it's always disruptive, even if you've got one person, a good employee who's playing a key role. But a lot of my clients will have multiple workers they're sponsoring, and really, if they lose the license, it's catastrophic. Those individuals. So if you have your license revoked, those individuals would have you have to immediately stop employing them. They have their visas curtailed, which means cut short. The visas will normally be cut short to 60 days. They've got to find some other kind of immigration route, which will be hard, or more realistically, they'll have to leave the UK. So massive consequences if you have your license curtailed, if you breach your sponsor license duties. Have I just come off screen share? So just wait for the slides to come back up. There it is. So hopefully you can see the slides okay. Let me know if not. So yeah, visa curtailment, individuals get the visas cut short to 60 days. You've got the reputational damage, potentially externally, but also, internally, it's obviously a nightmare. And again, you have this cooling off period, but this time it's a minimum of 12 months. So, so I'm not sure what's going on with the slides. They keep coming off, but I'll carry on. Yeah, so you have this 12-month cooling off period where you can't just sort of pay money and rectify stuff immediately. You're going to be automatically out of the picture for 12 months. And again, you've got the costs and wasted time if you get this wrong. Okay, so that's the sort of scary stuff. Let's move on to more practical matters now and look at how the Home Office can do a compliance check. I think, by the way, Katie is my colleague who's doing these slides. I think her connection's maybe a bit dodgy, which is why these slides are cutting out. If it carries on, I'll share them on my own screen, but we'll carry on for now. So yeah, actually first, just looking at how likely are you to have a compliance check? Okay, so again, I've just highlighted some sections from the guidance, which I think are sort of pertinent to this issue. So we use risk assessments to guide our compliance activity and focus that activity on the areas of highest risk. And they go, I mean, the only sort of concrete thing they really go on to say beyond that is if you operate a virtual business model with little or no physical office space, it is highly likely we will conduct a compliance check with your authorizing officer. So unfortunately, the Home Office does not publish their sort of risk assessment for when how they profile people. Okay, so that's secret. But what we've got on the next slide is our sort of opinion of what risk factors. This is just based on our sort of direct experience of supporting businesses. So these are risk factors affecting the likelihood of you being targeted for an inspection or compliance check by the Home Office. So, and this is not an exact science, this is what appears to be the case. So it appears that the Home Office profile according to sector. So if you're in certain types of sector, including the care sector and hospitality, which happens to be our two main areas, the kind of sector areas that we support. I think these have, especially hospitality, so I'm talking here about pubs, restaurants, takeaways, hotels, etc. There's a perception, and there's probably a reality that they have been seen to be sort of open to abuse as a sector, to be employing illegal workers. And I think the same is also true for the care sector, which is perhaps why these two sectors are a particular target. Another risk factor is how much you are paying your workers. So those at the lower end of the pay scale tend to be targeted. So there's a bit of crossover with care and hospitality, which tends to be at the lower end of the pay scale. The Home Office appear to look at how long you've been trading for. So a question I quite often get from individuals starting a new business or just started trading is, how long do I have to be trading before I get a license? There's no black and white rule regarding, there's no black and white answer to that. The longer you've been trading, the better. They seem to look at turnover, number of employees. They're getting all this information on the license application form. They're also looking for the ratio of sponsored to non-sponsored workers. So if you are, I've got one client who is only sponsoring 3 individuals, but they only have 8 employees. So that's actually a high proportion of sponsored to non-workers, whereas another client is sponsoring a couple of thousand and has 5. Well, that's a less of an alarm bell to the Home Office. I'm not saying any of this to put you off. This is just to make you aware of how sort of likely you are to be inspected. More obviously is if you've had any kind of previous immigration issues, then that will definitely be so previous immigration issues like license refusal, license revocation, issues with illegal workers, that's a definite trigger. And then, as per the previous slide, if you don't have an office or you have a virtual office, the Home Office claims that you're kind of target number one. I'm actually not convinced that they carry that out, but certainly it's a kind of it's in the negative column in terms of likelihood to be inspected if you don't have your own premises. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are the different types of compliance check the Home Office can carry out. There's the kind of traditional compliance check is an on-site inspection where they'll actually turn up at your business and grill you for a good sort of 2 to 4 hours. That's an in-person going through your files. They will always interview the authorizing officer and normally the level 1 user. So these are the two, what they call key personnel, who need to be appointed when you have a license. And they will also normally speak to any sponsored migrants, just to check that the reason they're really speaking to the sponsored migrant is to check that the role that you say they're doing is what they're doing in practice. Home Office making it more of a move towards inspections by Zoom, so a bit of a COVID development, similar to the on-site inspection, but done by Zoom. I should say for either of those, it can be an announced or unannounced inspection. I think you'd be very unlucky if it's unannounced. They'd have to really suspect something untoward's going on. So it's normally you'd get a couple of weeks warning. And they can just check as well, just based on the evidence you provided. So not much you can do there. They'll just check what you've already submitted as part of your license application. And then the last one here is a compliance check by email. Now, this is what we've seen a massive explosion in since Christmas. And I'll show you the standard letter that lots of people are getting, which I will show you in a moment. Next slide, please. In fact, we'll show you it now. So what do they want to see? Hopefully, Katie can share this standard letter, which is being sent out to lots of organizations that apply for a license. So here we've got, it's a standard letter. We've obviously redacted the, if you could just, can you maximize the PDF, or is it, maybe it already is. So yeah, this is a standard letter lots of people are getting who apply for a license. Thank you for your application. In order to consider your application, you must provide the following documents. So before I go through this, this is a letter aimed at organizations that are about to apply for or have applied for a license, but the exact same information is sought if you are inspected when you already have a license application. So this is relevant to everyone. So if you could just scroll down, I'm just going to pick out a few things they're looking at. So they want you to confirm that you've read all the detailed guidance, okay? There's a full staff list confirming full name, details of all staff. That's all straightforward. A detailed job description for all the roles you want to fill. That's straightforward. If you keep going down, you have to say what salary is and the job code. That's relatively straightforward. You have to provide a contract, a dummy contract of employment, or if you have someone named. So if you have an individual already identified as you're definitely going to be sponsoring job logs from Indonesia, his details would be in your draft contract. But this is all fairly straightforward. If you keep going, and they say, in addition, you'll need evidence. I'll just go back a tiny bit. In addition, you will need to evidence the processes you will use. Yeah, so you will need to evidence the processes you will use for all the duties in the table below. These documents must be what you currently use. It can be in the form of documents, Excel, Word, Excel sheets, screenshots. I'm not going to spend ages on this, but I just want to get across how much detail they really expect here. So this is all, you have to be evidencing all of this. So how you check someone you wish to employ. So some of this is evidence, some of it's information, but we'll just quickly go through these. How you check someone you wish to employ has the right to work in the UK. A record of right to work checks. I'll be going through these in a bit more detail, but I'm just going to go through these in outline now. how you monitor visa expiry dates, contact details for employees. How do you ensure contact details for employees are correct and up to date? What do you do with previous contact details for employees? Keep going down. Any attempts you've made to recruit from the settled workforce. So any recruitment process you've had before you've tried sponsorship. If you've got someone in mind, why are they considered suitable for the role? And then how do you intend to inform us if there are any significant changes in the sponsored migrant circumstances, including a time frame? Now, there are various, I will just dwell on this for a moment because I don't think I cover it later on. There are various what's called reporting requirements that you have to comply with for having a license, such as if the sponsored individual doesn't turn up for work on the first day, then you have to report them to the Home Office. Or if they go absent without leave for 10 days or more, you have to report them to the Home Office. You have 10 days to report them to the Home Office. Various other things like that. There's also various requirements. If your organization details change, you have to report them within, I think it's 20 days for that. So yeah, how do you record absences? That's a bit more routine. Conditions the sponsored migrant will be entitled to. Okay, if we just go back to the slides now. So that's, and that's all evidence. So, you know, when we do it, we're providing 3 screenshots for 3 employees kind of thing. So it's really quite detailed what they want to see. I'm hoping the slides can come back up. Just give me a second. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now we are actually getting to the detail of what they look at if they inspect you. Okay, so hopefully you know about right to work checks to some extent. You should be doing right to work checks on all staff anyway, regardless of having a license. So this is getting evidence that an individual has the right to work by checking their immigration status document. So it could be a British passport, or it could be a biometric residence permit, or it could be an online right to work check. Okay, so it's basically been optional up until you get a sponsor license. It's optional to do a right to work check. You could basically take the risk. So the idea behind a right to work check is that if you do a right to work check on Joe Blogs from Tanzania, I'll give you an actual real example of this happened to my client. The restaurant business guy turns up for work, says he's Romanian at the time. Romania's still in the EU. We're not in the EU. But at the time, it was a Romanian just needed a passport and they could start work. It was really simple. This person said he was Romanian, started work. A few weeks later, immigration enforcement turn up and say, this guy's Albanian, he's not Romanian. Because that business hadn't done a right to work check, they hadn't checked his document, back in that day, it was taking a photocopy of it. They received a £20,000 fine. Okay, if they had, I don't actually know if this guy he might have had a fake Romanian passport. If he had that and they took a copy of it, thought it looked out real, thought it checked out, took a copy of it. If it turns out it's actually a false document, or for some other reason the guy's not got right to work, they are protected if they've done this right to work check. So that's just a very quick outline of what right to work check is in case you didn't know. But basically you could take the chance yourself and not do a check, and then as long as the person wasn't illegally working, then you could kind of get away with it basically. However, that changes when you have a sponsor license. It's mandatory to do right to work checks on everyone as a sponsor license holder. Aside from the requirement to do it, it's mandatory for having a sponsor license. As I said, there is a £15,000 to £20,000 fine if you're found to be employing someone without the right to work. And again, you've got this sort of reputation. It's not a good look to be employing illegal workers. You've got the disruption to your business if someone's found to be working illegally. What I want to do is just go through, I mean, I have done a whole right to work check webinar for others. Katie, someone's trying to get in, if you could let them in. Yeah, I have done a whole webinar on right to work checks, not the most exciting subject, but so yeah, it's a lot of detail there, but I just want to go through some of the key things to be aware of, which a lot of people don't know. So there's just kind of things that I've noticed that people get a little bit wrong, or issues to be aware of. So the right to work check must be conducted before the individual commences employment. That's really important. You can't conduct it even on the, you can't really do it on the day they start either, because it has to be before they start employment. There has been a system of where you're allowed to do what's called remote checks. So checking, you're seeing the individual by Zoom or by Teams. That was a COVID concession. That's coming to an end on the 30th of September, so later this month. A crucial change a lot of people aren't aware of is that for EU nationals and anyone with a BRP, that's a bit jargony, is a biometric residence permit. So that's the card most people now get, which giving them the right to work. So for anyone who holds a BRP or is an EU national, you have to now be doing an online right to work check. And that's as of post April 2022. So you cannot, if you're just photocopying BRPs, that's not valid, and that'll be a problem. Have to be doing online right to work checks. But it still is the case that anyone with a British passport or with these kind of legacy immigration status documents, you can still take a photocopy of them. And yeah, another thing some people miss out is that you should be recording when you take a right to work check. So for those, if you do an online right to work check, I think it automatically stamps when you've taken the right to work check. But a lot of people will just take us, for example, a photocopy of a British passport. That's not enough. You should be recording when you undertook the right to work check. So for example, you take a photocopy, but then say, I confirm a right to work check was undertaken on 6th of September 2022. Okay, so that's yeah, right to work is probably getting right to work checks is probably the single biggest thing. The Home Office will zoom in and go through your right to work records. So that's something. I mean, if you haven't been doing it right, I mean, all you can do is start doing it right now. And I guess it's better to backdate and check people's right to work rather than do nothing. Just got a question from Faith. When the staff are on your sponsorship and visa was obtained through your company, do you still need to do the right to work check? So question is, if you're sponsoring someone, do you have to do a right to work check? Yes, yeah. That should be easy enough for you to do. I know it's a bit crazy because you will obviously know they have a genuine right to work check because you've been sponsoring them, but just, yeah, do a right to work check on them as well. Next, please. Okay, related to the previous slide is doing follow-up right to work checks. So, all right, just Sadaf has asked, where can we find a link to the right to work check? There are a couple of documents that you'll need. Maybe Katie can have a look. There's a document checklist, which tells you what documents you can rely on to carry out the check. So that's probably a good starting point. And then there's other documents about how to actually carry out a right to work check. So there's a few that you'd probably want to see. And then there's another link for how to carry out an online right to work check, because that's a totally different procedure. So we would try and get those links up if we can. Right, so follow-up right to work checks. So if someone has a time-limited visa or time-limited permission to work, it's not enough just to do the right to work check before they start employment. You have to be doing a follow-up right to work check. And again, this is a total obsession of the Home Office. So you have to have a lot of what I'm talking about here is having systems or policies in place. You have to have a policy in place to carry out a follow-up right to work check. What this means in practice is actually quite simple. You need to be diarising, A, when their visa expires, and B, I would say a 2 or 3 month reminder prior to their visa expiring. So let's say the visa expires on the 1st of December, you'd have 1st of December 2022, you'd have something in your diarising system saying, Joe Bloggs' visa expires today. And then you'd have something 3 months before that saying, reminder, Joe Bloggs' visa expires in 3 months' time, contact Joe. Okay. The diarising system's up to you. It could even just be a paper diary. But what the Home Office want to know, they don't want to know that you did actually. Well, they do want to know that you actually do have a reminder, but they want to know that you've got some kind of system, because what their concern is that Joe Bloggs starts working for you, his visa expires, you don't know that his visa's expired, he's carrying on working for you, but he doesn't have the right to work. To be honest, it's a lot of this is really aimed at large companies where you've genuinely got maybe hundreds of foreign workers. Now, I suspect a lot of you are not of that size. So what I always say to you is that I know that this is a game to some extent to be played, right? But you have to play this game, annoying as it is. So you have to have this diarising system in place, okay? And you have to be properly storing the evidence as well, because they will want to look at the actual right to work checks, the photocopies or the PDFs that you've done in respect to the right to work checks. Okay, I hope this is all making sense to anyone. A couple of questions, which is good to know that people are awake. But I'm just going to crack on. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, again, this seems like a really small thing, but it's a total obsession of the Home Office. They want you to have a system in place to check that the sponsored migrants' contact details are up to date. So they're very strict that you must have the latest contact details, including address, email, telephone number, mobile or landline. I mean, that's not too unusual. What is a bit annoying for a lot of businesses or organizations that you have to keep the historical contact details. So if you've got a current system in place where you just override their contact details, that is not sponsor license compliance, and you can get in trouble for that, petty as it sounds. So, and I think the reason for this is that the Home Office, if someone goes AWOL, so if Joe Bloggs, this fictional sponsored migrant, goes AWOL, the idea is that you can then present the Home Office with a full history of current and previous contact details, so they can go and chase after him, basically. So you must retain historical details. So that probably will require some amendments to your system. You have to be sending out, well, in my opinion, because the requirement, the Home Office, by the way, they don't tell you how to implement a system. They just say these are the rules and you need to find a way to comply with the requirements. And one of the requirements, you must have up-to-date contact details. The way I translate that is that you should be sending out regular reminders, chasers to definitely your sponsored staff to say, what are your current details? Then you can point to the Home Office and say, look, we've got a system that every 6 months, we've got a reminder. I think you'd probably want to send it out to all staff, but the duty is on sponsored staff. And again, yeah, the key thing is to be properly storing the contact details. And I think with all of this, ideally, you want a policy, a handbook, some kind of system, so you can say, this is what we do. It's not just in the HR manager's head. That doesn't look so good. Okay, next, please. Correct SOC code and salary. This will mean, I imagine half of you will completely understand this all already, and then some of you, this might be totally alien to. So I just need to step back a minute and explain about the SOC code and minimum salary, what that is. So whenever you sponsor someone, you have to sponsor them under the correct SOC code, which is the Standard Occupation Classification Code. So all jobs come under a certain code. Some of them it's really straightforward, like a chef comes under code chefs, whereas other jobs it's less obvious what they fall under. Every code has an associated minimum salary, okay? And so one of the focuses of the Home Office is that the individual you are sponsoring is being sponsored under the correct code, and that they are being paid the minimum salary associated with that code. Quite a complex area to do with the whole minimum salary thing, so I won't go into that now. But if you are not paying the minimum salary and they're not in the correct code, that's a massive problem. So just make sure they're in the correct code and that you are paying them the minimum salary. And it's worth just pointing out that the Home Office, I don't think they do this yet, but they're going to start doing it soon. They will monitor your payments to the sponsored migrant through the PAYE system. So you can't just say, we're paying them 30,000 a year, you have to actually be paying them because they'll be keeping an eye on you. And you shouldn't be paying. I think it's not such a problem if you're paying them more than you meant to, but if you're paying them less than you meant to, and definitely less than the minimum salary, less than the minimum salary is a massive problem. Next slide, please. Okay, this next one is genuine, what the Home Office called genuine vacancy. And this is really looking at your selection process. So there used to be something called a resident labour market test, which was this old, very annoying process you had to go through before you could sponsor someone who's not what they call settled or not British. It involved advertising in what used to be called job, I can't remember the name, the kind of job center online. You had to advertise there for 28 days, advertise somewhere else. Really laborious, strict process of evidencing in a certain type of way for 28 days and all that kind of stuff. Thankfully, that's been abolished. But the Home Office, it's not quite that simple. The Home Office still want to know that the vacancy is what they call genuine. So now it's like a genuineness test. In practice, you'll normally need to show evidence of recruiting for the role. Okay, I'll come to when you don't need to do it, but the general requirement is that you don't need to do this formal resident labour market test, but you're probably going to have to show you've been advertising. And if you did advertise, as this is taken from the guidance again, you must still retain evidence of any recruitment activity you have undertaken. And if you did not advertise for the role, you must be able to explain how you recruited the worker. Next slide, please. So if you have advertised, you need to have even though there's no resident labour market test, you still need a screenshot to print out or photocopy the advert, capturing the kind of key information about the role and where it's been advertised. Keep a record of the number of people who's applied for the job and the number of people shortlisted for interview or for other stages of the recruitment process. So to basically keep a spreadsheet of who's applied or have some kind of system to say who's applied, who's, you basically want evidence based to say, the only reason I've gone to sponsor Joe Blogs from Indonesia is because look at our sad attempts to recruit from the domestic workforce. And then you want one other form of evidence, such as interview notes or common questions. This is all evidence you should be retaining on file to basically justify why you're recruiting from outside the UK. Okay. Quite often the individual might already have been working for you. So let's say they were on a student visa, working for you part-time, or any other type of visa, working for you legally. In that case, you don't have to advertise. That's fine. So there is basically an exemption if they've already been working for you. So I always like it if the individual's been working for you, because it just saves you a bit of a headache around evidencing recruitment. Takeaway message there is there's no resident labour market test, but unless the person's already been working for you, you'll generally need to show and evidence an advertising and selection process. Oh, and Faith has asked a good question, which is, does this apply to professions in the shortage list? So for those of you who don't know, there is something called the shortage occupation list, which is a list of professions which are recognized by the government as being kind of officially in shortage. It includes the likes of doctors, nurses, care workers, senior care workers, kind of IT roles, engineering, kind of stuff. The question is, do you need to advertise, sort of paraphrasing a bit, but do you need to advertise if the job's in the shortage occupation list? So the answer is yes, you do. But confusingly, the Home Office have been giving we've heard rumor about them giving presentations saying you don't need to advertise if a job's on the shortage occupation list. That's actually incorrect information. And weird as it sounds, you can't trust what the Home Office say at a webinar. You can't even trust what they say when you phone up their telephone line. They quite often give out wrong information. But I think perhaps it would be viewed less dimly, okay, if someone's on the shortage occupation list, but you still have to be showing it's a genuine vacancy, and the stuff about advertising, all that is from one of the key Home Office documents. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, this last, what I've been saying before is kind of unique stuff to the world of immigration and sponsorship. You kind of just have to have generally good HR systems, right? Which you kind of need to be doing, you ideally want to be doing anyway. I'm not going to go through all this now because it's kind of general HR stuff. You know, you want a good induction process. They want to see a proper chain of command, who's reporting to who, recording absences and leave, that you've got policies in place for that, proper files for each employee, proper contracts of employment. When you apply for a license, you have to have at least one level 1 user. A level 1 user is the person who has a login to this web interface that allows you to administer the license. They recommend you have a second level 1 user once you get the license. Idea is that if one person's off sick, there's someone else who steps in. Other thing last thing to say here is when you get, if you have your license or when you get your license, log in every month. Yeah, just log in, just diarize to log in for 2 seconds because they monitor how often you log into the system. And loads of people have recently been getting sent emails from the Home Office saying, oh, we've noticed you've not logged into your system for 6 months or a year or whatever. They're not specifically taken action in that instance, but slightly veiled threats. So do log in. If not, you can just check an update and log back out if there's nothing to do. So in reality, again, if you're a kind of multinational company, you'd probably genuinely be wanting to log into your system every week because you're trying to keep on top of all these people you're sponsoring. It's just not, in reality, once you've got your people sponsored, you might not need to be logging in that often, but just do it once a month. Keep them happy.
Lewis, how
Yes.
do we log?
How do you log in? Well, once you get your license, you'll be given login details by the Home Office to this web interface. Yeah.
So that will be on an email somewhere.
Yeah. So once your application's approved, you get a letter saying your application has been approved. Okay. Buried within that, annoyingly, on like page 3 is your ID, and then you get a separate email with your password. Yeah. And that will get you into the system.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of implementing compliance, I'm afraid I can't just magically sort out your systems from afar. And actually the Home Office say, I've mentioned this before, there's no prescribed way. They don't tell you exactly what is an effective system. They've just got these principles that you have to be implementing. I mean, the idea in general is that you have to have these systems so that you can monitor your staff, and it's up to you how you implement your system. You could have paper diaries, paper files, or it can be done digitally. You're clearly going to have some kind of diarizing system. You're definitely going to have diarizing system for like visa reminders and for updating contact details. HR packages can be really good. Obviously, there's a cost. We use Breathe HR, but loads are available. And you absolutely banging, banging the drum a bit here, but you just ensure you're doing the right to work checks correctly, because that is one discrete area that you can, I don't say easily address, but it's kind of clear what you need to do once you get the correct guidance. Log into SMS once a month, that's what I've just mentioned. And then just ensuring that you've got appropriate key personnel appointed. So again, this level 1 user authorizing officer, they do background checks on these people. So obviously they can't have a criminal record, immigration problems, bankruptcy, financial soundness, but you just need people who are on top of it, who are switched on, who are going to engage with the process. What you don't want is someone who puts down their name to this and then doesn't know what's going on, and then they're not going to be managing the license properly. So you need someone who's switched on, or people who are switched on and who are going to kind of engage, because basically a lot of HR people, or picking on HR, but various people are a bit daunted by the whole sponsorship process. But once you sort of engage with it, it's something you can get your head around, and a lot of people can kind of even get a bit interesting. Maybe that's just, I think that because that's my line of work. All right, I think that's nearly it. Next slide, please. Just briefly, in terms of the services we provide around sponsor license compliance, if you don't yet have a license, we can compile something called a pre-license compliance, report. This is a name that we use. And this is to head off any potential inspection. So this is something we'd have a separate consultation with you to go through your whole systems, get evidence from you, make a nice, pretty report, which we then send off voluntarily to the Home Office as part of the license application. There's no requirement that you send that. The idea is that by volunteering all this information, the Home Office are less likely to inspect you, basically. Or we have consultations just to go through your systems, explains what is required. We can also do audits of your system, so check where you are and check your right to work records. We can also do specific right to work check training if you want. Next slide, please. I think that's it. And then just some more information about the kind of services that we provide. So that's not too bad. It's 5 to 11. How did you find that? I hope did you find it helpful?
Very helpful, Lewis.
Okay, thank you.
And we're in, we've had our application accepted, and so we're on to the next stage. So a lot of your webinars dealt with pre-application, but it's just reminded us of things that we need to do, and with right to work and diarising, checking right to work, and even possibly coming back to you to do an audit at some stage. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think basically the fact that you're all on this call is a good sign. So it's not rocket science. It's just kind of like fiddly. It's a bit boring, sort of thing that's quite easy not to do. But basically, if you get it all right at the beginning, whether you've got your license or post-license, and you've got all your systems in place, then you don't have to worry. You can really then crack on with sponsorship, saying, all right, we know that if we're going to sponsor more numbers, we're going to get a bit of heat from the Home Office, but we've got the systems in place, so there's nothing to worry about. So it just kind of gives you that security to crack on with sponsorship, really. Michelle's been really helpful, and so at the back of our minds, we're in a comfort zone with her. So good. That's great. Anyway, thanks for your help today. Okay, thanks, John. And thank you. I mean, unless anyone else has got any questions or anything to say, I will bid you farewell. Thanks very much for joining, and we've got more webinars coming up, so do keep an eye out for those.